Good morning. Good morning and welcome to this service of worship at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Tucson. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Reverend Bethany Russell Lowe, and I have the great pleasure and honor of serving as your minister. Our community is striving to be as varied as the blooms of the Sonoran Desert, so whoever you are, whoever you've been, and whoever you are becoming, I invite you to bring your whole self here and now. We are a covenantal community, which means that we make promises with each other about how we are together when we are together. And in this time of continuing pandemic, part of our covenant we are asking of you all is to wear masks here in worship. Some people might be asking for some degree of social distancing. We ask that you respect that. And part of our covenant is also an expectation that if you are attending here in person, you are as vaccinated as you can be, or have plans to be as vaccinated as you can be. So if you're joining us here in worship and you're unwilling to be vaccinated, you're welcome to join us for worship. We just ask that you join us on YouTube next week. I extend a special welcome this morning to any visitors or people who feel new and invite you to fill out a guest information card. If you're joining us on YouTube, our administrator, Mary Weiss, will post a link to that in the chat right now. If you're here in person, our membership welcome area is now open, so if you join us for social hour, there's a little alcove with a sign above it still. I think there are clipboards in there with yellow sheets of paper that is the guest information card for you to fill out. And we invite everybody to join us for social hour right after the service in Goddard, which is just out the patio doors, kitty corner to this building. There will be coffee, iced tea, lemonade, and today there is lunch, if you would like. Yay! The price of lunch has gone up during the pandemic, as everything else has. So we are asking for $10 if you would like lunch. If you need a comped lunch, come talk to me. The kitchen ministry is planning to do lunches around once a month, but let's give them some grace as they amp up. And just one announcement, well, a few announcements for you today. Next week, we are having a service that's focused on postponed grief or delayed grief. It's a time of the year when people around the world honor those who have passed on, those who have died in their lives. So if you have a picture or a memento that reminds you of someone in your life who has died, I welcome you to bring that next week. We'll have a table somewhere up here where you can put those things. So if you'd like, bring a picture next week or a little thing, small thing. That is it for this morning. Before we get much further into worship, I would love for you to turn to your neighbor and tell them about something that brought you hope this week. Did you notice this week the Texas Rangers bloomed, dotting roadways and yards with a purple so brilliant it hardly seems real? When those bushes, known also as Texas sage among many Latin names, bloom all at once, I am reminded of our interconnection, of our interdependence, of the fact, the truth, that we are connected beyond our wildest imaginations. Do they talk to each other, those nearly purple bushes? Do they pass signals through their roots? Do they just know because they have all felt the same seasons? I know that at least one of you has an answer, knows the truth, but I prefer the mystery of the thing because time and time again it happens. They bloom all together. And the fact that it happens, and that it happens so synchronously, takes my breath away. The purple blooms remind me that we too are interdependent, and we too can bloom in unison. We too can respond. When injustice comes our way, we can say together, not one more. When hatred rears its ugly head, we can say together, love over fear. When despair visits our home, we can say together, you are not alone. May we use this hour with this gathered people to loosen our grip on our independence and imagine a world where we are more like the Texas sage, visibly and beautifully interdependent with each other. Come, let us worship together.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Bert Meek. I'm the worship associate this morning. It's time now to do our chalice lighting, and in a second, speak a little more closely to the mic. I got that. I'm being signaled. And then now we're good. All right. So it's time for our chalice lighting ritual, and in just a second, you'll see those words up there. We go. Perfect. They're written by Reverend Dr. David Breeden. Please read along with me. We tender this flame, opening the book, turning to a page yet to be written, opening a story yet to be told. May we fill this fresh page wisely. May we write a new story into being. May we together inscribe the page with hope. So those of you watching us from home, if you have a candle or a chalice, please light that while Reverend Bethany lights our chalice here in Holland. Brian.
For this next song, I'd encourage you to stand and sing in body or spirit as you are able. On the second verse, a little quieter, and see if you can hear those people that are joining us from home on YouTube, at home on YouTube, sing a little louder on the second verse. Rise as you are able. For all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For all life is a gift, which we are called to use to build the common good and make our own days glad. For all that is our life, we sing and thanks and praise. For all life is a gift, which we are called to use to build the common good and make our days glad. For all that they serve, for services we give, for work and its rewards, for hours of rest and love, we come with praise and thanks. One more verse. And one more verse, Hong-Yu. Sorry, hold on. Done. Here we go again. Fourth verse. For sorrows, spare. Oh. Oops. Fearful hours that pass, we come with praise and thanks for all that is our life. I forgot that there was 4 verses to that hymn. I apologize. Please be seated. Thank you.
Oh, there we go. Kind of. Are we quiet today? The microphone? Okay, I will try not to pop. Once upon a time. Don't you love how that starts? Once upon a time. I love stories that start once upon a time. It could be anything, right? This story is set on a chilly winter evening with loving Bobcat sitting alone on a rocky ledge that he used as his home, listening to the wind howling through the sage. He wondered what his animal friends were doing and whether they might be lonely too. Meanwhile, down in his burrow, Ground Squirrel was celebrating a great harvest of nuts and seeds. And as he hopped happily around the burrow, he paused and thought to himself, I wish I had somebody to celebrate with. Further on down the wash, underneath some prickly pear cactus, Mouse was feeling sad. She remembered the loss of an elderly mouse friend earlier that year. And she said, I wish I had somebody to mourn with. Over on a rock pile off on the corner of the desert, Snake was coiled up tightly, thinking about the whole wide world and how much he had yet to learn about it. I wish I had somebody to learn about the world with, Snake thought to himself. And then I become the best snake I can be. And in a tall, tall saguaro, Elf Owl sat pondering the big questions, as you know owls do. Who are we? Why are we here? She wondered aloud to herself, wishing she had somebody to discuss those questions with. Down in the wash, Sonora Javelina probably was thinking about other things as she rooted around in the dirt. I want to help my fellow animals, they thought. I want to build a better world, but I can't do it by myself. And perched on a branch above them, black-throated sparrow chirped, I wish I had somebody to sing with. So, loving Bobcat decided he'd had enough of sitting alone in the desert. He trotted over to a small clearing and started a bonfire, which soon grew into a blazing flame held within the chalice of the fire pit. Soon the other animals came to join him, drawn by the warmth of the fire. And what did they do? They began to talk, to share their stories and their questions, their joys and their sorrows, their dreams for a better world. They celebrated together. They mourned together. They learned and they planned together. They pondered and they tried to change the world together. And they sang plenty of songs, too. All the animals were glad to be part of such a wonderful group, united not by rules about what to believe, but by a common wish to learn and grow, to mourn and celebrate, to work and sing together in community. What would have happened, though, if each of the animals had hid in their burrows or their nests or their trees or their rocks and said to themselves, those animals don't want me here, I'm going to stay home? What if one of them had decided that others were, quote, definitely not to be trusted, trademark? Would they have stayed home, or would they have asked others to? What if when they had gathered around that fire, they had told that one story about somebody's cousin, sister's, friend's, relative who did that one thing, and so all of those animals were not to be trusted? So stories, even stories that start once upon a time, are wonderful, magical, fabulous things. Some research even tells us that stories, that putting it into a narrative with a beginning, a middle, and an end, help us remember facts better, up to 2,200% better. So stories stick with us. And stories aren't always true. Telling stories about others that aren't always true can be unkind and unhelpful and lead to othering. Leads to misunderstanding, to vitriol, maybe even our current political climate. It can lead us to fear people we don't actually have anything to fear from. And that's the power of storytelling. But, what do we do when the person we disagree with is actually somebody that denies our inherent worth and dignity, or the inherent worth and dignity of somebody we love? What if loving Bobcat had invited Uncle Loves to Eat Squirrels for dinner? What if loving Bobcat had invited Aunt Doesn't Believe That They is a singular pronoun to dinner? What do we do? I don't know, and I don't think there's easy answers for those stories. How we negotiate our families and those dynamics and the ones we love is tough, tough, tough work. And I know that when we write a single story with a big T truth to it about others, we cause harm. We might miss out on having a wonderful conversation with loving Bobcat by telling ourselves that loving Bobcat is just like Uncle who eats squirrels. So our animal story, friends, ends with a nice, tidy little end. And we can draw a lot of lessons from that story, and I hope we'll think about it and maybe talk about it some more. But life doesn't end that way. Life ends with the more important questions of, what do we do with that uncle at dinner on the holidays that are coming up very soon? Thank you.
Jimmy Lee, I always love your storytelling. Oh, it's time now for that part of our service in which we make our offering. So, however you participated, whether you're watching us from afar, today, tomorrow, the next day, or you're here in person, please remember that our congregation depends on your financial support. For those of you here now, as you entered, was the basket outside now? Oh, anyway, there was a basket there as you came into the service, the collection baskets. The ushers right now are standing in the back, and they'll walk along the sides with the basket for you to make any contributions that you wish. They'll also be available as you leave Holland if you want to contribute at the end of the service. For those of you watching us from afar, you're welcome to send a check to our church office. You can give online at uuctucson.org/donate, or you can text to this number, 833-361-5796. Please remember that our church flourishes because each of you share with the rest of us your love, your compassion, your time, and your treasure. Sharing our financial blessings is one way that we can contribute to the greater good of both our church and our larger community. So your generous offering will now be received with grateful appreciation and our shared hopes and values. Thank you. Oh, the next ritual for us in today's service is our joys and sorrows. Remember that all of us carry both joy and sadness inside. These emotions may not be obvious to those around us, but they are very real and very present for each and every one of us. And we all need time and place to honor those feelings. Please remember that our earth is strong, and it's more than strong enough to hold our pain and our joy, our love and our anger. In our shared bowl over here, which we use for this ritual every week, it holds those big rocks, and they signify our collective celebrations and mournings. In just a minute, it will hold the smaller stones that you will add to represent your individual joys and sorrows. For me personally today, I love watching the crescent moon smile upon me as it rose above the rincons. I remain grateful that I have both the physical ability and the leisure time to be able to take all that in. I am distressed when I see angry, incompetent, and delusional political candidates who are running for office in our state. It frightens me to think that some of them may actually be elected into positions of power. We who live in the desert know that water is a life-sustaining and scarce resource. Let's remember that those who are walking through our desert right now without access to water. So we pour water from this jug here to represent the jugs of water left by our ministry partner, No More Deaths, to help those journeying across the desert to make it somewhat less perilous. Now, for those of you who wish to share your joy or your sorrow with us online, you may have already contributed to this on menti.com, but you can also do it now. Please enter this code, which you see, it's 26257124. Those of you here in the sanctuary, you can send your thoughts and feelings to let Brian Moon know, and he will put them up on Menti for you. And also, lastly, if you're here in person and you have a joy or a sorrow in your heart that you wish to share, you are welcome to come up to the table now, put a stone into the water to symbolize how you're feeling today. Let's see what folks say on Menti. Light and love to my friend Joe and his family. Joe lost his dad after a 4-year struggle with illness. Sending love to our lost ones, Mama Lifer, Dad South, and Brother Wayne. Love and miss you all. So grateful for the positive participation of my high school students in our activities this week. They are my joy. The loss of my cousin Patrick. For Marion Leonard and Dawn Leonard. It was a joy to spend time in Zion National Park, I'm sure. I am joyous that I am here in Tucson visiting family. Transitions of both joyful and tough are in my heart today. Rest in peace, John Lee English III and Patty Hayes. I place these stones in the bowl for all the joys and sorrows which have gone unmentioned. Oh, I'd like to share with you a prayer. It's entitled Call from the Past, Present, and Future. It's written by the Reverend Tanya Marquez. So please join me in a time of contemplation, meditation, tranquility as you take in these words. Call from the past, from the heights of the Andes, the jungle, and the desert, from the depths of the sea, from a time that was, from a time that stretches beyond our memory, we are called. Our histories stretch back to the first people, the first steps, the collision of worlds, to abrupt beginnings, to all wanderers of this land. We have inherited the unfinished labor of our ancestors and of those who came before us. We are called to continue the work. Call from the present. The voices of our people call us now. The world harbors their joys and their sorrows. We hear the cries of people demanding justice. Now, in that call, we recognize the voices of those who wander in the desert, the border crossers, the navigators, the justice seekers, the dreamers, and the hopeful. We weave our story into the story of our ancestors right here, right now. We are in the midst of responding to the call that comes from all corners of this land, from the south, the north, the east, and the west. We are called to sustain the work. Call from the future. The voices of those who will be call us, a reminder of who we need to be. In the weaving of our story into the web of life, we must remember that we must not cut the strings, for there are others coming after us, others with tender hearts and strong wills, with creative determination, those who will live in this house tomorrow. Their vision escapes us, yet we are called to prepare the road, to leave behind possibility, the foundations upon which they will build a better tomorrow. We are called upon to create new opportunities.
From your seats, please respond in song. This next song is built so that you can sing any of the 4 sections of text which are about to appear at the same time. I'm going to sing each section twice, top to bottom, a couple of times, all the way through. And after that, I'm going to sing whatever feels appropriate. I encourage you to land on the one you like the most and sing it at the end as we fade out. It begins. Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where do we come from? Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where do we come from? Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery, where are we going? Where do we come from? Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery.
You sound great. The cacophony. Our reading today is an excerpt from a TED Talk, and I encourage you to listen to the whole thing. It was linked in your order of service, which was emailed to you this morning if you're on our email list. Let's cue that up, AV team.
I'm a storyteller, and I would like to tell you a few personal stories about what I like to call the danger of the single story. I grew up on a university campus in eastern Nigeria. My mother says that I started reading at the age of 2, although I think 4 is probably close to the truth. So I was an early reader, and what I read were British and American children's books. I was also an early writer. And when I began to write at about the age of 7, stories in pencil with crayon illustrations that my poor mother was obligated to read, I wrote exactly the kinds of stories I was reading. All my characters were white and blue-eyed. They played in the snow. They ate apples. And they talked a lot about the weather, how lovely it was that the sun had come out. Now, this despite the fact that I lived in Nigeria. I had never been outside Nigeria. We didn't have snow. We ate mangoes. And we never talked about the weather because there was no need to. My characters also drank a lot of ginger beer because the characters in the British books I read drank ginger beer. Never mind that I had no idea what ginger beer was. And for many years afterwards, I would have a desperate desire to taste ginger beer. But that is another story. What this demonstrates, I think, is how impressionable and vulnerable we are in the face of a story, particularly as children. Because all I had read were books in which characters were foreign, I had become convinced that books, by their very nature, had to have foreigners in them and had to be about things with which I could not personally identify. Now, things changed when I discovered African books. There weren't many of them available, and they weren't quite as easy to find as the foreign books, but because of writers like Chinua Achebe and Kamara Laye, I went through a mental shift in my perception of literature. I realized that people like me, girls with skin the color of chocolate, whose kinky hair could not form ponytails, could also exist in literature. I started to write about things I recognized. Now, I loved those American and British books I read. They stirred my imagination. They opened up new worlds for me. But the unintended consequence was that I did not know that people like me could exist in literature. So what the discovery of African writers did for me was this. It saved me from having a single story of what books are. I come from a conventional middle-class Nigerian family. My father was a professor. My mother was an administrator. And so we had, as was the norm, live-in domestic help who would often come from nearby rural villages. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and our old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit. And his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket made of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. Years later, I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this. She had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me, as an African, was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals.
We didn't have time for the whole thing, but it could have been the sermon, but I don't know. It's in my contract, right? I have 2 kind of random stories for you this morning. One is, and there are pictures to accompany these stories. AV team, can we get that first picture up? The first is where the title of this service originated. This is a picture of some petroglyphs out at Picture Rocks. I was at a clergy retreat there last April, and I saw these pictures on rocks, and I wondered, what were those ancient people trying to tell us? What stories were they telling with these? Oh, there's a hint of where's to come. And then a story about my 7th grade history class in that first week. Yeah, go to the stuffed animal. You'll see it in a second. In my 7th grade history class, on one of the first days, our teacher had us sit in a circle and put a table in the middle and put a duck that looked a lot like this one on that table. And they had us, what was his name? Mr. Cohen said, draw what you see. That was the only instruction. Draw what you see. And a lot of us are like, oh, there's a duck. So we drew the duck. 29 of us drew the duck. And Andrew Burns drew something behind the duck, right? It was a little bit of a sassy move. I think he knew the assignment, but he drew something behind the duck. And the teacher said, there's always one of you, and there's always only one of you who draws the thing behind the duck. The point of that exercise was, I think, where I'm going in my sermon, which is that we all have a different view of history. We were seeing different sides of the duck, and the pictures looked a lot similar, very similar, but on different edges. And there's always someone who is talking about the thing that other people aren't talking about, right? The thing behind the duck. So it turns out with these two stories, they're both quite single stories because archaeologists don't actually think that prehistoric people were telling stories at all. These were likely religious imagery. They were tracking the sun, or it was religiously involved, not storytelling per se. The stories were around fires, right? Oral tradition. And the 7th grade history lesson, I was thinking about the meaning of it for me this week, how Andrew drew the thing behind the duck. For some reason, the meaning for me today, the lesson I'm taking from it, is something related to this big lie that's floating around. It's the reminder for me that it's not about whether or not it's true, but it is a part of the story of our time. That thing behind the duck, the big lie. It's not true. I don't believe it's true. I don't think you believe it's true. But it is a part of the story of our time, this complex story that is being created. Because as Jamili reminded us this morning, stories don't end nicely. Happily ever after is not real and true and representative of life. Stories are more complex, ours collectively and ours individually. What is important is that we find and tell stories that give our lives meaning. Different tellings of different stories can open us up, help us release from trauma, help us understand more about us and about our world. Understanding multiple stories, even embracing stories that contradict, can keep us from those dangers of a single story that Etched told us about in our reading. And here I'm reminded of an ancient story, which is actually 2 stories, the story of Genesis. Anyone ever read that and realized that there's 2 Genesis? If not, go and read it. There are 2 distinct stories in those first chapters of the Jewish and Christian scriptures. The story of Genesis, as interpreted through modern Christian theology and not modern Christian theology, is a story that has had negative consequences, right, on the lives of women in our world, and men too, I would argue. The story has given roots to the heteropatriarchal oppression in the Christian world and all that Christian world has sought to affect and control, which is a lot, right? And those dynamics, that interpretation of the story through this lens of patriarchy, is not the only interpretation of this story. Feminist theologian Judith Plaskow wrote her own interpretation of the story of Genesis. It's called The Coming of Lilith. I don't have time to read the whole thing, but again, it's linked in that email you get on Sunday mornings if you want to read it. In short, it starts with the premise that before Eve, there was Lilith. And Lilith and Adam were partners. They were created both out of the dirt. They were equal in all ways. Adam, Plaskow writes, being a man, didn't like this situation, and he looked for ways to change it. These are her words, not mine. In this story, in Plaskow's story, Adam tries to order Lilith to do something, and rather than submit or comply, she flies away. She just leaves Eden. And Adam gets really frustrated. He sends God after Lilith, but she still refuses to come back to Eden and to Adam. So that's the point in Plaskow's story when God puts Adam into a deep sleep and creates Eve out of his rib. As the story eventually goes on, Eve, too, eventually finds liberation from Eden and from Adam to be with Lilith. It's a good story, and it turns these usual narratives we think of in Genesis on their head. Which story is true? Probably neither. Maybe you'll argue me. Which story offers more meaning and helps us understand the world around us? Both together. There's another telling of this story that I listened to just this past week. It comes from Cole Arthur Riley's book, This Here Flesh. It's excellent, if you'd like to read it. Here is their reflection on the Genesis story. It's a little long. On the day the world began, God became a seamstress. When Eve and Adam eat from the tree and decay and despair begin to creep in, when they learn to hide from their own bodies, when they learn to hide from each other. No one ever told me the story of a God who kneels and makes clothes out of animal skin for them. I remember many conversations about the doom and consequence imparted by God after humans ate from that tree. I learned of the curses too, and maybe even could recite them. But no one ever told me of the tenderness of this moment. She goes on, it makes me question the tone of everything that surrounds it. In the garden, when shame has replaced Eve and Adam's dignity, God becomes a seamstress. God took the skin off of creation, their own creation, to make something that would allow humans to stand in the presence of their maker and one another again. Isn't it strange that God didn't just tell Adam and Eve to come out of hiding and to stop being silly because God's the one who made them and has seen every part of them? It doesn't say that in the story, or at least we do not know if God did. But we do know that God went to great lengths to help them stand unashamed. Sometimes you can't talk someone into believing their dignity. You can do what you can to make a person feel unashamed of themselves, and you hope in time they'll believe in their beauty all alone. Doesn't it make you want to read the whole book? This Here Flesh. Go read it. The question of truth here feels less relevant to me than the stories themselves, the multiple interpretations. How we make meaning from stories, that we examine how stories shape us, that we amplify the stories that affirm human dignity, feel like the more pressing tasks. In thinking about how to tell our complex stories, the poet Stanley Kunitz encourages us to live in the layers, not the litter. Live in the layers, not the litter. Live in the contradiction, not the capital T truth. Live in the fullness, not the mess. Live in the complexity, not the single story. I wonder where in your life you have become attached to a single story. Maybe it's a story about who you are, or how you became who you are. Maybe that story is helping you. It might be hurting you. And us, too, I wonder, where in our community have we become attached to this single story of who we are as Unitarian Universalists, as Tucsonans, as the UU Church of Tucson? Is that single story serving us? How is it hurting us? Why release ourselves from that single story? Writer Ursula K. Le Guin writes this: storytelling is dangerous to those who profit from the way things are, because it has the power to show that the way things are is not permanent, not universal, and not necessary. Having the real, though limited, power to establish institutions into question, imaginative literature also has the responsibility of power. The storyteller is the truth teller. We will not know our own injustice if we cannot imagine justice. We will not be free if we do not imagine freedom. We cannot demand that anyone try to attain justice and freedom who has not had a chance to imagine them as attainable. Maybe that's all it takes. What if that's all it takes? I don't know about you, but I can't read the story of Genesis the same way. It's not just about the sins of humanity. It's also about Lilith escaping and God being a seamstress. The interpretations expand, and the complexity offers me more space to make meaning. Friends, what's the story you would tell if you knew that that story would get us free? May we dream the dreams that seem impossible. May we tell the stories that seem improbable. And may we seek to create that world we dream about into existence through our stories, one word, one sentence, one story at a time.
Please rise in your spirit and join in singing Turn the World Around, hymn 1074. We come from the fire, living in the fire. Go back to the fire, turn the world around. We come from the water, living in the fire. To the fire. Next words, Nicholas. We come from the mountain, living in the mountain. Go back to the mountain, turn the world around. Whoa, so is life. So is life. Whoa, so is life. So is life. Do you know who I am? Do I know who you are? See we one another clearly. Do you know who we? On that page again. Do you know who I am? Do I know who you are? See we another clearly. Do we know who we are? Oh, so is life, Patiwa. So is life. Oh, so is life, Patiwa. So is life. Water make the river wash the mountain. Fire make the sunlight turn the world around. Heart is of the river, body is the mountain, spirit is the sunlight, turn the world around. We are of the spirit, truly of the spirit, only can the spirit turn the world around. Whoa, so is life, Patiwa. So is life. Oh, so is life, Patiwa. So is life. Oh, so is life, Patiwa. So is life. Oh, so is life, Patiwa. So is life.
Friends, yes. As you go from this place, remember that this is a place where you are known and can know, see and be seen, honor and be honored. May we continue to create community that knows not only that it is, but also who it is and tells that story loudly and proudly. Please have a seat for our chalice extinguishing words.
Carried away with the song, I almost forgot my words here. All right. It's time now to extinguish our chalice and those candles at home. So if you would please join me with the words written by Reverend Wayne Anderson. Here we go. Take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage. For deep down, there is another truth. You are not alone. Thank you.
We have an unconventional postlude today. I'd like to invite Jody up, and Mary and Jesus, can you come up here? We need you both up here on the chancel, please. Mary, is this still a surprise to you? Is this still a surprise, Mary, or did you know? I don't know if you've heard, but both Mary, come closer, come on, if you're willing. Both Mary and Jesus have been working at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Tucson for over 20 years. Yes, this was one of the celebrations that we missed during the pandemic, but it's about time. So it's 20 years they've both been working for. And in that time, Mary and Jesus, you have strengthened our community. You have held us together. You have done what it takes to keep this place going. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We have some small gifts, and then we'll give them a big hoorah. Jesus, this is yours. And if you want, we know that you're not necessarily Unitarian Universalist, but I know that you participate in the communion of coffee with us. So this is something for your coffee and some coffee. And Mary, we know that you are one of us, and so this is a chalice to help you remember that we care about you.
And our postlude has 3 verses in it. It's going to be gendered. It's going to be he, she, and they. For he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow, which nobody can deny, which nobody can deny, which nobody can deny. For he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow, which nobody can and she, for she's a jolly good fellow, for she's a jolly good fellow, for she's a jolly good fellow, which nobody can deny, which nobody can deny, which nobody can deny, for she's a jolly good fellow, for she's a jolly good fellow, for she's a jolly good fellow, which nobody can deny. And
we are going to continue the celebration in Goddard. There is cake and there is lunch. And Jesus and Mary, if you would station yourself such that people can come and appreciate you individually, that would be wonderful. Yes. Please, let's go on ahead on over to Goddard for some celebration.